YouTube, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. Articles for you in this episode. Description of the video for your convenience. For the hamster to catch everything up here. The first article is off of 100%fedup.com. It says, California ignored Oroville Dam warnings, while Obama and California governor obsessed overspending 15 new tunnels. And which is up here, and we'll get this scrolled up a little bit to the article. Fella, well, for some reason he's taking his time. Come on. Video in this, which is probably slowing things down a little bit. That messes, it does that. Well, for goodness sakes. I don't know what the problem seems to be here. It doesn't seem to want to scroll. Well, maybe that'll queued up here. Well, come on. Rolling. One step forward, two steps back. I know the hamster's working. I see the little wheels. Okay. Priorities, government and accountability at its finest. If somebody held casters like in case of the Flint water crisis, we would likely not be reading about them. Officials have a lot to answer for in the wake of Oroville Dam fiasco. They decided in 2005, ignored the warnings that the massive earthen spillway adjacent to the dam itself could erode during heavy winter rains, which it has done, which it very nearly did this week and by the end of this winter. Photographs in this spillway. Then it says, no less to blame are the water agencies, including the powerful Metropolitan Water District in California, which argued that paying for upgrades a decade ago was unnecessary. Now we got to wait for it to scroll again. The 80,000 people wait Sunday run for their lives begged to differ. And the hamster spinning. Means trust the policy tested. Population of 38.8 million people relies on a 60-year-old war consisting largely contained adequately and are now unreliable. His obsession with spending $15 billion to dig 2 Delta tunnels is preventing the state from spending that money to upgrade the Delta levees. aqueduct and doing basic maintenance to the state dams. And see if we can get this to scroll up a little bit more here. Looks like there's some video here. No, I guess it's just a picture of Obama and Brown. It says 2 weeks before President Barack Obama left office, his administration vowed full speed ahead on California's controversial Delta Tunnel project, calling it a water supply as well as its environment. All by fishermen, family farmers, and environmental justice advocates to terminate the Delta Tunnels plan. Interior Secretary Sally Jewell on January the 4th issued a secretarial order mandate the completion of Governor Jerry Brown's controversial California water fix process in a timely manner. The administration order directs the Department of Interior and its timely actions to help address the efforts of drought and climate change on California's water supply and imperiled wildlife. Water tunnels, 30-mile tunnels that would be built in Sacramento Delta, San Francisco Bay Area. Each tunnel would be 40 feet in diameter, larger than the tunnels that carry BART trains under the San Francisco Bay. California water fix would be buried 150 feet below the ground. California Delta again, it's a huge inland where Northern California's major river coverage before the water flows into the San Francisco Bay. It used to be mostly wetland, but much of the land was converted to farming. Who would get water from the tunnels? The state's major water system that serves about 25 million Californians from the Bay Area to San Diego. Years ago, the network of reservoirs, canals, and aqueducts stretches hundreds of miles. Some maps in this to see those. For it to scroll up here a little bit more. It's designed to fix a tricky problem that the state planners ran into a century ago. Rain and snowfall in California, but most of the state's population and many farms reside in Central and Southern California. Of the Delta Water Tunnels project would divert water from the Sacramento River to Central and Southern California. Administration want to build them. Drought may have brought water battles to the forefront, but those battles of California politics, and that's because the central hub of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is in bad shape. From the Delta by two massive pumping facilities that can move more than 1 million gallons per minute. That they've been shown trap endangered fish like Chinook salmon and Delta smelt. At great risk, regulations require slowing down the pumps, potentially limiting how much water reaches cities and farms. Tunnels would take water near the Sacramento River and deliver it to the pumping facilities. State officials say that would make the water system more reliable because pumps would be used less, avoiding the impacts on endangered species. The tunnels cost and who'd pay for them? Construction could cost $14.9 billion. Add in the construction impacts, operations, and maintenance, and $17 billion over 50 years, paying off the bonds that would finance the project. To invest $550 billion on the nation's infrastructure needs. Brown agrees that California should jump on the opportunity, but the money has to be used wisely. Oroville Dam, despite sounding over the years, does not inspire confidence. News group Paul Rogers reported Monday that the three environmental groups, the Sierra Club and the South Yuba River Citizens League, with the federal government on October the 17th of 2005 as part of the Oroville Dam's process, urging federal officials to require that the dam's emergency spillway be armored with concrete rather than remain just. If we get through this winter without and many more billions of dollars in property loss expected from the failure of the Oroville spillway, then we can take this as a warning to prevent other disasters. But that's still a big if. Storm clouds return on Thursday. So, in this, if you want to take a look at that. So, that article we have here. Let's rates with me. Sieverts per hour. All right, wait a minute. It's off of EEE News. That's what it is. And it says nuke experts say must be entombed like Chernobyl, a threat to the world for the rest of time. Possible to clean up due to shockingly high radiation levels. News World, February the 6th, this came out. Astronomical readings bring major concerns to a cleanup operation already spiraling out of control into territory previously uncharted in the history of nuclear power. To top it off, 530 sieverts per hour might not be the worst cleanup workers have to worry about. Stated that the surface level radiation readings from plant's pressure vessels 1,000 sieverts per hour, but are already seemingly unsurmountable tasks. Decommissioning process. Expert engineer and former Army Gunderson told News World in an email that the position of Fairwinds and Profit is and radiation levels are presently way too high to remove the melted fuel and should be entombed. Chernobyl's sarcophagus century before attempting dismantlement to make dismantling the facility almost impossible for 100 or more years. The workers would be too significant, Gunderson said. February 7th of 2017, in a statement they sent to us, TEPCO said the level of radiation discovered was higher than expected. Have been taken to prevent leaks of radiation during the investigation. Engineer and San Diego State business professor Dr. Murray Jenix told us is that cleanup just became much more difficult than expected. But inside where the fuel is melted, it went all over the place. Jenix, an expert on nuclear containment, surmised would ultimately be forced to build around the unit like the one that encapsulates reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. Let nature take its course for a while. February 11th of 2017 says this level of radiation at Fukushima Unit 2 is beyond extreme, even in comparison to the inside of Chernobyl reactor, where radiation levels are only 34. Dr. Helen, February 13th of 2017, says it will be almost impossible to decommission units 1, 2, and 3, as no human could ever be exposed to such extreme radiation, and that this fact Fukushima Daiichi will remain a blot on Japan and the world for the rest of time, sitting as it does on active earthquake zones. Bottom line, these will never be cleaned up nor decommissioned because such a task is humanly impossible. February the 3rd said, yet to identify the location and condition of the melted fuel in the 3 most seriously damaged reactors represents a challenge unprecedented in history of nuclear power. February the 8th said TEPCO has released some jaw-dropping figures. Take much longer than expected, and Japan's National Institute of Radiological Sciences said medical professionals had never even thought about encountering this level of radiation in their work. Hanabe, a nuclear safety expert and research scientist at Japan Research Institute, said expected the radiation reading inside the Dachi high. It was still shocking to learn how high it was 6 years on. It will be very difficult to operate robots in there for a long time to come and remove the melted fuel, so the findings might greatly affect time schedule, he said. I had for you in that article. The next one we've got here, as soon as the hamster, it's off the New American, launched to replace the United Nations. A global effort dubbed Democratic Nations is working to abolish the United Nations, widely ridiculed as the Dictators Club, and replace it with an international forum open exclusively to free nations. Basically, it is a repeal and replace campaign to protect the world from the UN and increasingly vicious attacks on freedom and self-government. A number of lawmakers around the world have expressed interest in the campaign. Travels from city to city, hosting events to expose the UN and promote an alternative. That broke the camel's back for organizers appears to have been Council Resolution 223, or try this again, Resolution 2334, declaring the presence of Jews in part of Jerusalem to be a violation of supposed international law. Outrage across the political spectrum. Neoconservatives and globalists jumped on the bandwagon to defund the UN. On Capitol Hill, interest in protecting America and liberty from the UN has surged since that vote. Of Democratic Nations agenda also has strong support among certain Jewish and Zionist groups seeking to defend the constant UN station. The dictator-dominated UN becoming increasingly and openly hostile to freedom, borders, and self-government, not to mention the perpetual UN scandals, the regular rape of children by UN peace troops against whistleblowers, and other horrors. Movement to protect humanity and liberty from the UN has been growing for decades as well. And in the years ahead, it's almost certain to keep getting stronger. President Donald Trump was a fierce critic of the UN, not that the outfit was not a friend to freedom, Israel, or the United States. The Covenant of Democratic Nations held its global launch event last month on Capitol Hill. The League of Nations outlived its usefulness during the Hitler regime, read the invitation January 23rd confab held office building. After the war, the League was replaced by the United Nations. Now, the United Nations has outlived its usefulness and must be replaced with a new international body of those nations governed by democratic principles, devoted to genuine equality and peaceful relations throughout the world. It should defund and withdraw from the United Nations and movement to achieve world peace for all in a new world body. The Covenant of Democratic Nations continued on its website and various documents and invitations. The Covenant of Democratic Nations will review, amend, or nullify all acts and resolutions of the United Nations and its agencies, creating a new body of long overdue reformed and updated international law. The Trump administration is already working on executive order and actions nicely with the agenda. Attendance at the global launch in Washington, D.C. was Representative Trent Franks, Republican of Arizona. This is a critically important issue, he explained. Started out with a noble charter, and has not only failed their charter, they have distinctly moved and done actual harm. They have become American, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, anti-freedom mob. alternative and democratic nations. Repeal and replace. On the campaign's website, France also the United Nations is a must be replaced. Said the has a cumulative 73 freedom index. Lawmakers based on their Constitution and international body with the global stability and protecting and promoting try that again human rights and freedoms in the world requires founded by genuine democracies and devoted as the foundation for world peace. The covenant of voices also spoke at the event. Among them was Edwin Black, author of the book IBM and the Holocaust, figures behind the campaign. The body began as a sick organ, and there, Black explained in a recent commentary about the body, highlighting the fact that the UN member regime's bloodthirsty and on the planet. Another leading activist pushing the plan who attended the global launch was Sarah Stern, founder of the Pro-Israel Endowment for Middle East Truth, or the EMET. Panelist Kenneth Marcus, former director of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, pushed exit from the UN. Constitutional attorney Nathan, who has reportedly worked on dozens of Supreme Court cases, said the UN deserves an obituary after signing its own death warrant by passing the Security Council resolution claiming the Jewish presence in East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria was illegal. The Israel Project event. You now have states that are basically glorified concentration camps, like who get to have an equal voice with Australia, Canada, and the United States, he said. Constant demonization of Israel at the UN. Events have been or will be held in New York, Palm Beach, San Francisco, Melbourne, Sydney, Los Angeles, Detroit, and other major cities. A number of additional speakers and panelists have made appearances at the subsequent events. Other liberty-minded Western nations have also joined the bandwagon. Malcolm Roberts with the anti-globalist One Nation Party, for example, said that the UN was also a threat to his country. This quite clear, he said. Australia's values and way of life are also at risk from insidious institutions such as the unelected swill. Action needs to be taken. An event, anti-UN group, Parliament. The campaign to repeal and replace the UN has been almost entirely ignored by the established press so far. Articles and columns outlets, there has been virtually no U.S. media coverage of the effort. On a fringe far-left website called BuzzFeed, attacks maker for opposing the UN and the killing of unborn children. Much of the rhetoric of Democrat campaign has touted as the ideal to be pursued and requirement for admission. The United States, though, explicitly rejected pure democracy and dangerous system of government in which individual rights would not be adequately protected. To establish a constitutional republic, law, and democratically elected representatives in which of individuals would be protected. And the Federalist number 10, known as the father of the U.S. Constitution, made the point clearly saying that democracies have ever been spectacles compatible with personal security and have in general been in the deaths. To guard against such a system, advocated a Republican form of government, by which scheme of representation takes place. prospect and promises the cure for which continued. And of course, the Constitution he wrote explicit as well. Or Constitution mandates a guarantee to every state in a republic form of government, not referring to the GOP, to the system of government based on rule of law to protect individual rights. It appears, though, that democracy pursues democratic nations hope to impose admissibility and on the ship with dictatorships and unfree regimes, which are welcome, even dominate its council. Of course, the Covenant of Democratic Nations is hardly the only effort to replace the Swedish-Hungarian Laszlo Szombathely is offering $5 million in UN-style organization allegedly solve global problems better than the current scheme. Threats with the Hungarian-born billionaire said, "Sweden, unlike many Szombathely, I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. Awfully, it's SZTFAL, appears to be a globalist, hoping 2.0 will impose a global climate regime, radical schemes as part of a new system of global governance for the 21st century. Various efforts to bring in the UN development for being explored. The Security Council vote on Israel, a large group to stop U.S. tax funding of the so-called Dictators Club unless it was present. At least 40% American taxpayers pay over $10 billion per year to the UN and its tentacles. 85 other UN member states combined in the exchange receive constant other American values. Separately, a group of liberty-minded U.S. lawmakers is working to have the U.S. government come to the UN. The legislation known as Sovereignty Restoration Act, or H.R. 193, would also evict the UN from U.S. soil while ending American support for the global outfit. Representative Franks of Arizona, who joined the Covenant of Democratic Nations campaign, sponsor of H.R. 193, his office did not have, try this again, his office did not have a formal press time. Clear people around the world that the UN is freedom or more ideas, and the UN will undoubtedly emerge. The Democratic Nations is the right solution to protecting humanity from the out-of-control UN remains to be seen. Need to be replaced, and considering that the fact that globalists on both sides of the political spectrum have proposed similar schemes for entangling alliances, a skeptical eye is certainly justified. However, simply by conversation on the threat posed by the UN Dictators Club to abolish its a valuable service for humanity and liberty. I say disband it, run it out of America on a rail, tarred and feathered. I'm not real sure even about replacement, but we shall see. The article that I have here is off the Oregonian Live. I think they call it Oregonian. And to get it up here on the screen for me. Come on, little buddy. I see the wheel spinning. There we go. Prosecutors take unusual move to hire jury consultant. Oregon standoff trial. There is some video in this if you want to pull it up to take a look at that. And up here for us. Again, see, we have one with, and for some reason my computer's just having a difficult time scrolling up videos in it. Time for a tune-up on the physical. Sit with federal prosecutors when jury selection starts Tuesday in the second trial of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge occupiers. The actual presence of the consultant is a vestige of what happens in the first trial. After questions about his impartiality arose across the board, acquittals of the armed takeovers several hours later. Current and former federal prosecutor and defense lawyers who have worked for in Oregon for nearly 30 years can't recall a single criminal case when a consultant has helped prosecutors pick jurors. Had that one experience bad for them, and they wised up and said that they could use some help, said Jeffrey T. Frederick, director of jury research services for the National Legal Research Group. Attorney Ethan alerted the judge last week of the government's decision to seek out the advice of consultant who it would be. One of several notable to be a more low-key trial compared to the long and contentious trial of occupation leader and some followers. Now this time, J3 of Bon Air, Georgia, identified by prosecutors as 41-day seizure over land rights, and three more minor players, Dwayne Emmer, 32 of Marysville, Washington, and Jake Ryan, 20. Defendants are, that means fewer U.S. Marshals. The defense attorneys are also from Oregon, be less likely to risk offending the judges like Ammon Bundy's lawyer, Marcus Mumford of Utah, did in the first trial by constantly challenging their rulings and drawing a thread of contempt. Only one of the four men is representing himself. That's a significant change from the first trial, when three of the seven defendants represented themselves and often questioned witnesses for themselves. District Judge expects less fireworks. She denied request to keep the defendants in line by ordering them not to make improper arguments, questions, or present improper evidence to the jury. Any indication that will recur, she said. But the proof will come as a trial of 12 jurors and 4 alternates. Expected to take at least 2 days from 100 prospective jurors from across the state, questions submitted by attorneys on both sides, though the judge will do the actual questioning. Side felony charges against the 4 men. All face a conspiracy count of impeding federal employees from carrying huge threats or force. Other defendants face other felony counts, including government property. The judge, not a jury, misdemeanor charges, including trespassing and tampering vehicles and equipment. Defense lawyer also hired to help them draft questions for the jury selection, but the defense consultant isn't expected court. Waiting for it to scroll up. Come on. Well, It's taking its time. Come on. The government consultant likely will already have helped research the backgrounds of prospective jurors, examining their online posts and Facebook, for example. Take notes on their answers and carefully watch the body language, demeanor, and tone of each potential juror. See a jury consultant on the prosecution side pointing to criminal conviction of 97% for of cases that go to trial in federal court. Jury consultants can be expensive, in thousands of dollars depending on the involvement, and are far more commonly used in civil cases or by defense lawyers in capital murder cases. The occupation case, Frederick and others said. Seized the refuge headquarters on January 2nd of 2016 after a rally in nearby Burns to support who were ordered to return to prison to serve out 5 years arson sentence for setting fire to public land, a stand against federal authority land. Your conservative kind of juror with a military background has been the kind of juror who has been more, Frederick said. But when you have a case where the issues may involve states' rights or protests of the Bureau of Land Management, and where the defendants tend to be fairly conservative, it's change. There really is a strong anti-government sentiment now existing in the conservative community. The decision was no doubt spurred by the surprising circumstances that developed in the first. One juror questioned another juror's impartiality in a note to the judge during deliberations, citing that the other juror's past work for the Federal Bureau of Land Management. Brown ended up dismissing the juror who was the target of the note and replaced him with an alternate juror. The reconstructed jury. The later said publicly that he favored convicting Bundy and some of the others. Margie, University of Oregon law professor and former dean of the university's law school, said it makes sense for the seek help, not just because of what happened with the first trial, but because attitudes about the government in the Northwest are kind of complicated, and given the times we're in, I'm not surprised, Paris said. But bringing in a consultant is by no means a slam dunk. It's portrayed on television, the law professor Valerie Hands. As to the new TV drama Bull, it's often quite challenging to anticipate how specific prospective jurors will respond to the witnesses and evidence as the case develops during the trial, Hands said. So the jury's out on whether they will be able to help in selecting a favorable group of jurors that will see it the prosecution's way this time around. By prosecutors are set to begin next week after President's Day holiday if all goes as planned. Prosecutors present similar evidence as the first trial, but have streamlined testimony significantly and plan to take just 5 for their case in chief. They may, after their arguments in relation to the federal conspiracy charge against the defendant, since jurors in the first trial felt the government failed to prove that the occupiers' intent was to block federal employees from coming to work. Stress that a large conspiracy can include several subgroups of conspirators to conspire required, according to their trial memo. They will argue that the defendants were, in various degrees, in the larger conspiracy by turning the refuge headquarters into a flop house, replacing their own signs and stationing armed guards at the refuge tower and entry gates. Evidence will also be directed more at the specific roles in the takeover, including testimony about allegations that some of them dug trenches and used refuge trucks Defense lawyers will counter that the occupation didn't result from formal agreement that of the four specifically federal employees from returning to work at the refuge. For the hamster here. They'll argue that takeover was an organic, involving event with people from despairing or desperate backgrounds who showed up. Emmer arrived, for example, to check out for himself what was going on at the refuge, then some tools at home before returning to do some repair work at the refuge headquarters, he and his lawyer contend. Ryan told the FBI that he went to the refuge to find out what Bundy and the others were teaching about the U.S. Constitution and responded to Bundy's call for support. That they weren't violent. The judge has made it clear to the new defendants that she won't tolerate certain things that went on during the first trial. Ammon Bundy, for instance, can't testify this time. The defense team has indicated that he'll be on the stand days. If an objection is sustained, it's sustained. Brown also told the lawyers involved, if you don't understand my ruling, ask. There. If I overrule you, please just accept the ruling so we can move on. Defendants in the first trial repeatedly made improper arguments to the jury or asked questions to which the court had previously sustained objections, forcing the government to object over 1,000 times. She said she doesn't anticipate that happening in this trial. The article that I have for you is off of Natural News. Get it to come up here. There we go. Robert DeNiro and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to announce something big tomorrow concerning vaccines and mercury. Jr., who has been named head President Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission, is joining forces with Robert DeNiro to make big announcement tomorrow about vaccines and mercury. According to media released this morning, the two are planning on announcing a unique challenge with substantial cash award to the American people and media. Ends at 9:25 a.m. on Wednesday, February the 15th, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The entire event will also be live streamed from the World Mercury Project's website, that you can click on in this article to get you to that if you'd like to view it. Project, headed by RFK Jr., envisions a world where mercury is no longer a threat to the planet and people. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the author of Thermosol, Let the Science Speak, the evidence supporting the immediate removal of mercury, a known neurotoxin, from vaccines. A selection of eye-opening excerpts from the book at this link, and there's a place you can click to view that. The sanity of injecting mercury into infants, RFK Jr. has been assaulted by much of the pro-vaccine media, including Time magazine, which ran this viral hit piece against him, and you can click a link to get to that, citing all the usual mercury lies of the corrupt vaccine industry, which continue to maim millions of children each year around the world. Has also found himself caught up in the vaccine controversy due to his involvement in the censorship of the Vaxxed film from